Go live in the streets if you have to. Maybe that will wake you up. My dad's voice cut through the sound of the pouring rain, loud and dripping with absolute disgust. He stood on the front porch, pointing a shaking finger out into the dark driveway. Behind him, my mother stood with her arms tightly crossed, a look of cold agreement on her face. And right beside her was my older brother, Elijah, wearing a smirk he didn't even try to hide. They all looked at me like I was a disease they were finally curing themselves of. They thought I was a broke, useless failure. They had no idea I was bringing in $15 million a year. So I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just smiled, turned around, and walked away into the rain. 3 weeks later, their entire world would collapse, and I would be the one holding the sledgehammer. Before I tell you about the absolute ruins they found themselves in just 3 weeks later, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Grab a warm cup of coffee, sit back, and listen to how I took my life back. The rain was coming down in sheets that Thursday evening. It soaked through my jacket instantly, but I barely felt the cold. I was 32 years old, standing in the driveway of the house I grew up in, being cast out like a stray dog. My father's words echoed in my ears. He truly believed he was delivering some harsh reality check. He genuinely thought that by kicking me out, I would hit rock bottom, realize how desperately I needed them, and come crawling back to beg for their forgiveness and their financial support. I stopped halfway to my car and glanced back over my shoulder. The porch light illuminated their faces perfectly. Arthur, my father, was a man who demanded respect but rarely earned it. He stood tall, chest puffed out, breathing heavily as if yelling at me had taken a physical toll on him. Eleanor, my mother, was already turning back toward the front door, dismissing me entirely. And Elijah was the golden child. He was 35, dressed in a crisp designer button-down shirt, holding a glass of expensive bourbon. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and amusement. He was exactly the kind of son they wanted, outwardly successful, loud about his achievements, and deeply embedded in the corporate rat race. I looked at my car. It was an older, faded silver sedan. It looked like the kind of car a struggling man in his 30s would drive. That was by design. I opened the door, the hinges creaking slightly, and slid into the driver's seat. I didn't slam the door. I didn't peel out of the driveway leaving tire marks. I just started the engine, turned on the headlights, and drove away at a perfectly normal speed. As I watched their house disappear in the rearview mirror, my hands gripped the steering wheel. I wasn't shaking from sadness. I wasn't crying. I was incredibly, intensely calm. It was a strange kind of clarity. For years, I had bent over backward to keep the peace. I had absorbed their insults, their passive-aggressive comments, and their blatant favoritism. I had played the role of the quiet, struggling younger brother because it was easier than dealing with the relentless drama of proving them wrong. But tonight, they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. They thought they knew me. They thought I spent my days messing around on the internet, chasing pipe dreams that would never pay the bills. They didn't know that the little internet project they loved to mock had evolved into a massive e-commerce and logistics empire. They didn't know that the beat-up sedan I was driving was just a decoy I kept at a local garage specifically for family visits. They didn't know that I had a portfolio of properties, investments, and a bank account that could buy their entire neighborhood. I drove for about 20 minutes until I reached a private, gated underground parking garage downtown. The attendant nodded at me as the heavy steel gate rolled open. I parked the old sedan in a corner spot, got out, and walked over to my actual daily driver. A sleek, jet-black Mercedes G-Wagon. I threw my wet jacket in the back, climbed into the heated leather seat, and exhaled deeply. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Elijah. It read, "Dad is still fuming. You really messed up this time, Matthew. Let me know if you need a place to crash for a couple of days. I might have room on the couch." I stared at the screen. The arrogance was almost suffocating. He didn't want to help me. He wanted to watch me suffer up close. He wanted to play the savior while secretly enjoying my downfall. I didn't reply. I simply turned off my phone, started the engine, and drove out into the city lights. I was heading to my home, not a dingy apartment, but a 4,000 square foot penthouse overlooking the skyline. I had given them every chance to be a real family. I had given them the benefit of the doubt time and time again. But sitting there in the silence of my car, looking out at the city I had quietly conquered, I made a promise to myself. I was done playing the victim in their twisted family narrative. I was going to let them dig their own graves, and then I was going to hand them the bill for the shovels. To understand how things got so toxic, you have to go back 14 years. The turning point in our family dynamic happened at my grandmother's funeral. I was 18 at the time, fresh out of high school and completely lost. My grandmother was the only person in that house who ever saw me for who I really was. She didn't care about status or appearances. She just cared about hard work and honesty. Before she passed away, she pulled me close and made me promise her one thing. She said, "Matthew, no matter how hard they push you, keep this family together. They are blinded by foolish things, but they are still your blood." I took that promise to heart, probably far more than I should have. Right after her funeral, the reality of my parents' favoritism hit me like a freight train. My grandmother had left a modest inheritance, specifically intended to be split between Elijah and me for our education. It was meant to be my college fund. I had plans to study business, to learn the ropes of accounting and management. But one evening, my parents sat me down at the kitchen table. My mother folded her hands and gave me a tight, sympathetic smile. "Matthew, your brother has an incredible opportunity. He got accepted into a prestigious MBA program. It's an elite school, and it requires a significant financial commitment." I nodded, waiting for the rest. My father cleared his throat. "We've decided to pool the resources. We are giving Elijah your half of the college fund. It's an investment in the family's future. Elijah has a clear path to a massive salary and a high-level corporate career. You, on the other hand, don't really know what you want to do. It would be a waste of money to send you to a local community college right now." I sat there stunned. They weren't asking me. They were telling me. They were legally in control of the funds until I turned 21, and they had found a loophole to drain it completely for Elijah. "But that's my money," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Grandma left that for me." "Don't be selfish, Matthew," my mother snapped, dropping the sympathetic act instantly. "Family sacrifices for each other. When Elijah is a top executive, he will take care of us all. You need to go out and get a job. Find your own way." So I did. I didn't go to college. I got a job working the night shift at a warehouse, moving boxes and loading trucks. It was backbreaking work, but it paid the bills. During the day, I taught myself coding, digital marketing, and supply chain management. I started a small online store selling niche industrial tools. For the first 2 years, I barely slept. I lived on cheap noodles and instant coffee. Meanwhile, Elijah was living the high life. He finished his MBA and immediately started bragging about his massive salary at a mid-tier financial firm. Every family gathering became the Elijah show. He would talk about his stock options, his expensive dinners with clients, and his inevitable promotion to regional director. My parents hung on his every word. Whenever the conversation shifted to me, the tone completely changed. "So, Matthew, are you still working at that dusty warehouse?" My father would ask, usually in front of guests. "I quit the warehouse, Dad. I'm running my own online business now," I would reply calmly. My mother would sigh loudly and roll her eyes. "Selling little trinkets on the internet is not a real career, Matthew. You need health insurance. You need a 401k. Look at your brother. He's a vice president now." I never bothered to correct them. I never told them that my trinket business had just secured a distribution contract worth $2 million. I just let them talk. I kept my promise to my grandmother. I showed up for the holidays. I bought them thoughtful gifts. I tried to keep the peace. As the years went by, the gap between my reality and their perception of me became comical. By the time I was 28, my company had exploded. I acquired 2 logistics hubs and built a network of fulfillment centers across the Midwest. My personal income skyrocketed. I was no longer just comfortable. I was independently wealthy. I bought a stunning penthouse right in the heart of the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows, imported marble, a private elevator. I traveled to Europe for business and pleasure. I ate at restaurants where the waiting list was 6 months long. I was living a life most people only read about in magazines. But whenever a family dinner rolled around, I played a completely different character. I had a specific wardrobe just for visiting my parents. Faded jeans, unbranded shirts, scuffed boots. I drove my old beater car. I did it initially to avoid their probing questions and their inevitable demands for money. If they knew I was rich, they would never look at me as a son. They would look at me as a bank account. One Sunday afternoon, I arrived at their house for a barbecue. The backyard was filled with my parents' friends from the country club and the local church. I grabbed a paper plate and stood near the grill. Olivia, my mother's best friend and the biggest gossip in town, walked over to me with a plastic cup of wine in her hand. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my scuffed boots. "Matthew, sweetie, how are you holding up?" she asked, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Your mother tells me you're still doing that computer stuff from home. Have you thought about going back to school? Elijah's firm is always hiring mailroom staff." I forced a polite smile. "I'm doing just fine, Olivia. The computer stuff keeps me busy." I looked across the yard and saw my mother watching us. She was shaking her head, whispering something to another woman. I knew exactly what she was saying. She was apologizing for me. She was playing the martyr mother burdened with a deadbeat son. Later that afternoon, Elijah cornered me near the cooler. He was wearing a polo shirt that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. "Hey man," Elijah said, clapping me hard on the shoulder. "Listen, I just got a huge promotion. Senior VP. The bonus alone is going to be 6 figures. Congratulations," I said evenly. "That's great, Elijah." He leaned in closer, his breath smelling like expensive beer. "Yeah, it is. Look, I'm telling you this because I want to inspire you. You can't just float through life, Matt. You're 32. You don't have a real job, you don't own a home, you don't have anything to your name. It's embarrassing for Mom and Dad." I looked at him, really looked at him. I noticed the dark circles under his eyes. I noticed the slight tremor in his hands. I noticed that his watch, a heavy gold Rolex, was actually a very good fake. I had an eye for details like that. Elijah was projecting an image of wealth, but something felt incredibly off. "I appreciate the advice, Elijah," I said quietly, "but I think I'm exactly where I need to be." He sneered, shook his head, and walked away. I didn't know it then, but Elijah's house of cards was already starting to burn, and he was desperately looking for a way to drag me into the fire with him. The final straw, the night they actually threw me out, started over a simple request for money. It was a Thursday night. I had just wrapped up a grueling 10-hour strategy meeting with my overseas partners. I was exhausted and looking forward to going home to my penthouse. But my mother had called me 3 times, demanding I come over for a crucial family discussion. When I walked into their living room, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. My father was pacing near the fireplace. My mother was sitting stiffly on the sofa. Elijah was standing by the window, nervously tapping his phone against his leg. "Sit down, Matthew," my father commanded. I took a seat in the armchair. "What's going on?" Elijah stepped forward. He cleared his throat, trying to adopt his authoritative corporate voice, but it wavered. "Matt, I have a massive investment opportunity. A tech startup. It's a guaranteed return, easily tripling our money in 6 months. But I need liquid capital immediately to secure my equity share." I looked at him blankly. "Okay, so use your massive salary and your 6-figure bonus." Elijah's face flushed red. "My assets are tied up in other high-yield portfolios right now. I need cash. Mom and Dad are tapping into their retirement to help me, but we are still short." My father stopped pacing and pointed at me. "We need you to take out a personal loan. $20,000. You have decent credit because you have no expenses. You pull the loan, give the money to Elijah, and he will pay you back with interest when the investment hits." I stared at them. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They had drained my college fund 14 years ago to hand to Elijah. Now, they were asking me to go into debt, to risk my own financial name, to fund his mysterious investment. "No," I said firmly. "I'm not taking out a loan for Elijah." The room went dead silent. My mother gasped, placing a hand over her chest as if I had just slapped her. "Excuse me? Your brother needs this. Your father and I are risking our retirement for this family, and you won't even go to the bank." "No, Mom, I won't," I said, my voice staying perfectly level. "If his assets are tied up, he can wait. I'm not borrowing money I can't afford to pay back just so Elijah can gamble it on a startup." Elijah slammed his hand against the wall. "You selfish little punk. You have nothing. You do nothing. I am trying to build generational wealth for this family, and you're dragging your feet over 20 grand. If you're so good at building wealth, Elijah, you wouldn't need to beg your broke younger brother for a loan." I fired back. That was it. That was the spark that blew up the powder keg. My father's face turned a dangerous shade of purple. He marched toward me, spit flying from his lips. "How dare you speak to your brother like that? He is twice the man you will ever be. You have lived in the shadows your whole life because you are lazy and ungrateful. We have tolerated your pathetic existence for long enough." He grabbed my jacket from the back of the chair and threw it at my chest. "Get out," he roared. "You are not a part of this family's future. If you are not going to contribute, you can get out of my house and never come back. Go live in the streets if you have to. Maybe that will wake you up." I looked at my mother. She looked away. I looked at Elijah. He was smirking, victorious. He had successfully deflected his financial panic onto me, making me the villain. I stood up slowly. I brushed the dust off my jacket. I didn't say a single word. I didn't need to. I gave them one last look, a look that said absolutely nothing, and walked out the front door into the rain. Later that night, sitting in my G-Wagon, I made a phone call. I called Jacob, my cousin. Jacob was the only person in the extended family who treated me like a human being. He was a hardworking guy, a school teacher, and he despised my parents' arrogance just as much as I did. "Hello," Jacob answered, sounding groggy. "Jacob, it's Matt. I need a favor." "Matt? It's almost midnight. What's wrong?" "Arthur just kicked me out. Permanently. He told me to go live in the streets." Jacob sighed heavily. "Good Lord. Are you okay? Do you need a place to stay? I have a spare room." "No, I'm fine on accommodation," I said, a slight smile creeping onto my face. "But I need you to do something for me. Over the next few weeks, I need you to keep your ears open. Tell me exactly what they are saying about me. Every rumor, every lie. Document it." "You got it, man," Jacob said. "What are you planning?" "I'm going to give them exactly what they asked for," I said coldly. "And then I'm going to take everything else." For the first few days, my life went back to normal. Normal for me, that is. I closed a major shipping contract, expanded our warehouse space in Texas, and enjoyed quiet evenings on my balcony overlooking the city. I completely ignored my family. I didn't block their numbers, but I set their notifications to silent. Not that they tried to reach out. To them, I was gone. Then, the reports from Jacob started rolling in. "You're not going to believe this, Matt," Jacob said over the phone the following Tuesday. I was sitting in my glass-walled office, sipping a macchiato. "Try me. Your mom had her prayer circle group over yesterday. My mom was there. Eleanor spent an hour crying, telling everyone that you had completely lost your mind. She said your internet business went bankrupt. You got evicted from your apartment, and now you are sleeping in your car." I chuckled softly. "Sleeping in my car? That's a nice touch." "It gets worse," Jacob continued. "She told them that they tried to offer you a room, but you violently refused and stormed out into the rain. She's playing the heartbroken mother whose son has turned to a life of vagrancy." My jaw tightened. She wasn't just lying to cover up the argument. She was actively campaigning to destroy my reputation in their social circle. She was building a narrative where she was the victim, and I was a dangerous, unstable failure. "What did Elijah say?" I asked. "Elijah is telling everyone at the country club that he offered you an entry-level job to save you, but you were too proud to take it. He's calling you a lost cause." I leaned back in my leather chair and looked at the ceiling. They were so confident. They felt so secure in their little bubble of lies. They thought they controlled the narrative because they assumed I had no voice, no power, and no platform to fight back. "Jacob," I said calmly, "don't correct them. If anyone asks you, just look sad and say you haven't heard from me. Let them spread the lie as far and as wide as they want. The higher they build this pedestal of lies, the harder the fall is going to be." I hung up the phone. I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. It was one thing to kick me out in a fit of rage. It was another entirely to systematically assassinate my character for social sympathy. But I still wasn't ready to strike. I wanted them to feel completely safe. 2 days later, the real betrayal happened. The one that severed the last microscopic thread of loyalty I had left for the woman who gave birth to me. I was in the middle of a video conference with a supplier in Berlin when my personal phone buzzed violently on the desk. It was an automated fraud alert from my bank. I excused myself from the meeting, muted the microphone, and opened the email. Alert. Large withdrawal initiated. $14,000 has been withdrawn from joint trust account ending in 4402. My blood ran completely cold. Account 4402. It was a joint savings account my mother and I had opened when I was 18, right after I started my business. Back then, the bank required a cosigner for certain business tier accounts because of my age. Over the years, I had moved my primary funds to private wealth management firms, but I had left that old account open. It held about $20,000, essentially emergency cash from my early days. I had completely forgotten she still had legal access to it. I immediately called the local branch manager, a woman named Clara who had known my family for years. "Clara, it's Matthew," I said, my voice tight. "I just got an alert about a $14,000 withdrawal. Tell me this is an error." There was an awkward silence on the other end. "Matthew, hi. No, it's not an error. Your mother, Eleanor, came in about an hour ago." "My mother withdrew 14 grand? "Yes." Clara sounded nervous. She was very distressed. "She said there was an absolute family emergency, a medical issue with you, actually. She said you were incapacitated and needed the funds immediately for hospital bills. Because she is a joint owner on the account, she had the legal right to request a cashier's check." "I'm so sorry, Matthew. I assumed you knew." I closed my eyes and gripped the edge of my desk so hard my knuckles turned white. She didn't just take the money. She used my fictional suffering to bypass any questions from the bank. It was a calculated, cold-blooded theft, wrapped up in a lie about my health. "Thank you, Clara. It's fine." I lied. I hung up the phone. I picked up my phone and drafted a text message to my mother. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I just asked a simple question. "Me, did you withdraw $14,000 from the old trust account?" The reply came 3 minutes later. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an excuse. It was the most arrogant, entitled justification I had ever read. "Eleanor, yes, I did. You are living in your car, Matthew. You obviously have no use for that kind of money right now. Your brother had an emergency. Family is a single unit, it is family equity. We had to take care of his needs. When you get back on your feet and get a real job, you'll understand. Don't be greedy." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Family equity. She had stolen $14,000 of the money I had bled for during my warehouse days, and she called it family equity. She genuinely believed that because she gave birth to me, everything I owned belonged to her to distribute to her favorite son. I didn't reply. I set the phone face down on the desk. The sadness was gone. The hurt was gone. All that was left was a terrifying surgical focus. They had just crossed from being emotionally abusive to legally and financially parasitic. I needed to know exactly what Elijah's emergency was. I texted Jacob and asked him to do some digging. It didn't take long. By that evening, Jacob sent me a screenshot from Elijah's Instagram page. The picture showed Elijah standing in the driveway of his townhouse, wearing designer sunglasses, leaning against a brand new, gleaming black Porsche Cayenne. The caption read, "Hard work pays off. Upgraded the daily driver today. Hashtag blessed, hashtag VP, hashtag luxury life." I looked at the date on the post. It was uploaded 2 hours after my mother walked out of the bank with my money. Jacob called me immediately. "Matt, please tell me you're seeing this." "I see it," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I asked around," Jacob whispered, sounding disgusted. "Elijah's credit is apparently in the toilet. The dealership required a massive cash down payment to approve the financing. Guess how much the down payment was?" $14,000, I said flatly. "Exactly. Eleanor stole your money to buy Elijah a Porsche." It was a masterclass in audacity. My mother had literally stolen my hard-earned savings so her golden child could maintain his fake image of wealth on social media, all while telling the world I was a homeless bum. That night, I didn't sleep. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse and looked out at the city. I thought about the promise I made to my grandmother. Keep this family together. "I'm sorry, Grandma," I whispered to the empty room, "but there is no family left to keep together." I walked over to my desk and picked up my phone. I dialed a number I rarely used outside of major corporate acquisitions. It was my lead corporate attorney, a ruthless bulldog of a lawyer named Harrison. "Harrison, it's Matthew," I said when he answered. "Late night, Matt. What do you need?" "I need a full financial lockdown. Every account, every trust, every asset. If my parents' names are attached to anything, freeze it, sever it, and isolate my funds. Consider it done. Anything else?" "Yes, I need you to put a private investigator on my brother, Elijah, and my father, Arthur. I want to know every cent they owe, every loan they've taken, every mortgage they've signed. I want to know what they eat for breakfast and how much they put on their credit cards to pay for it. I want them financially x-rayed." Harrison chuckled, a low, gravelly sound. "Sounds like war." "It's not a war, Harrison," I said, looking at the city lights. "It's an eviction." The next morning, I called my executive assistant, Elena. She was brilliant, sharp, and fiercely loyal. I told her I needed a few personal tasks handled over the next 3 weeks. I needed a meeting with the CEO of a specific real estate investment fund, and I needed an introduction to the editor-in-chief of the local Forbes affiliate magazine. The pieces were moving into place. The storm wasn't just coming. I was the storm. A week later, I sat in my office with a thick manila folder resting on my mahogany desk. Harrison had delivered the investigator's report. What I read inside didn't just surprise me. It painted a picture of a family teetering on the absolute edge of a cliff, blindfolded, and dancing. Let's start with Elijah, the golden child, the senior vice president, the man who lectured me on building generational wealth. Elijah was completely, hopelessly broke. His massive salary, most of it was heavily garnished. According to the records, his ex-wife, a detail he conveniently kept hidden from his social media, was threatening a brutal custody battle over child support he hadn't paid in 6 months. His townhouse was mortgaged to the hilt. He had taken out a second mortgage just to keep up with his country club dues and designer clothes. His credit cards were maxed out. The tech investment he begged for $20,000 to fund didn't exist. He just needed cash to stop the bank from foreclosing on his house. And that brand new Porsche Cayenne? He had secured the financing with a subprime lender at a predatory interest rate, using my stolen $14,000 as the bait. He couldn't afford the monthly payments. He was essentially renting the illusion of wealth until the repo men caught up with him. Then I turned the page to my father, Arthur. Arthur loved to project the image of a wise, conservative financial patriarch. But the reality was grim. He had grown desperate to prove he was still a heavy hitter in the business world. 2 years ago, he had quietly guaranteed a massive commercial loan for a mid-sized real estate developer. They were building a block of suburban townhouses. It was supposed to be a sure thing. But the developer mismanaged the funds, construction stalled, and the company was now in freefall. They were weeks away from defaulting on the loan. And because my father had signed a personal guarantee, putting up his own retirement accounts and the equity of his house as collateral, the bank was going to come after him for the entire multimillion-dollar balance. Arthur was staring down the barrel of total bankruptcy, and he was too proud to tell anyone. I closed the folder. A cold smile touched my lips. I didn't need to destroy them. I just needed to buy the cliff they were already falling off. The following Tuesday, Elena booked me a private lunch at an exclusive country club. Ironically, the same one Elijah could no longer afford to pay his dues at. I was meeting with Mr. Sterling, the CEO of an aggressive real estate investment fund. Sterling and I had done business before. He knew I had deep pockets, and I knew he had a killer instinct for distressed assets. We sat on the patio, overlooking the golf course, drinking iced tea. "Matthew," Sterling said, leaning forward, "you sounded urgent on the phone. What's the play?" I slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was the financial summary of the stalled townhouse development my father had guaranteed. "This project," I said, "the developer is going to default by the end of the month. The bank holds the paper. I want you to step in and buy the debt from the bank. They'll sell it at a discount just to get it off their books." Sterling glanced at the paper, his eyes scanning the numbers quickly. "It's a mess, Matt. Construction is paused. The guarantor is some guy named Arthur." "Wait, Arthur? Is this family?" "It is," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "But treat it like any other hostile takeover. I will provide the capital through a shell LLC. You buy the debt. When the developer defaults, you foreclose on the project and assume ownership. And then you demand immediate, full payment from the guarantor. Call in the entire debt." Sterling looked at me, raising an eyebrow. He was a ruthless man, but even he recognized the sheer brutality of what I was asking. I was asking him to financially execute my own father, using my money to do it. "If the guarantor can't pay," Sterling started. "He can't," I interrupted. "He's tapped out. When he defaults on the guarantee, I want the deed to the property transferred entirely to my LLC. I want to own the project free and clear." Sterling slowly tapped his finger on the table. "You're going to be his landlord, his creditor, and his executioner all at once. I am simply securing a solid real estate asset, Mr. Sterling. Can you get it done?" Sterling grinned, a shark smelling blood in the water. "Consider the debt bought, Matthew." With the trap set on the financial front, I moved to the public relations front. My family cared about appearances more than anything else in the world. Stripping them of their money wouldn't be enough. I needed to strip them of their illusion. That afternoon, I met with Sarah, the editor-in-chief of the regional Forbes magazine. She had been asking to do a feature piece on me for 2 years. I had always declined, preferring to keep a low profile. "Not anymore, Sarah," I said as we sat in my office. "I'm ready to do the interview, but I have conditions." She looked thrilled. "Name them." "I want the cover. I want a full, in-depth profile on how I built my logistics empire from a warehouse floor to 15 million in annual revenue. I want you to highlight the fact that I am a college dropout who was told by his own family that he would amount to nothing." Sarah's eyes lit up. It was a journalist's dream. The underdog story, the massive wealth, the family drama. "We can make that happen. When do you want it published?" I looked at the calendar on my desk. I calculated the exact week the bank would formally notify my father of his default, and the exact week Elijah's first overdue notice for the Porsche would hit his mailbox. 3 weeks from today," I said. "Drop the issue on a Monday morning. Let them wake up to it." Over the next 2 weeks, I finalized the paperwork with Sterling. My shell company quietly absorbed the massive debt of the townhouse project. I sat for hours of interviews with Sarah, detailing my business strategies and the early days of eating noodles while my brother squandered a stolen college fund. I didn't hear a single word from my parents or Elijah. According to Jacob, my mother was still telling anyone who would listen that I was probably living in a homeless shelter downtown. Elijah was still posting pictures of his steering wheel, pretending he owned the world. And Arthur was growing increasingly erratic, snapping at everyone, knowing his financial doom was creeping closer every single day. They were asleep on the train tracks, completely unaware that a freight train with my name on it was barreling toward them at full speed. Everything was in place. The accounts were locked. The debt was bought. The magazine was printing. The eye of the storm is always calm, but the back wall of the hurricane is the deadliest part. And they were about to walk right into it. 3 weeks. That was exactly how long it took for the carefully constructed, totally fake reality my family lived in to shatter into a million unfixable pieces. Started on a crisp Monday morning. I woke up early, poured myself a cup of black coffee, and walked out onto the terrace of my penthouse. The city below was just starting to wake up, cars moving like little ants through the concrete canyons. I stood there, feeling the cool morning air on my face, and checked my watch. It was 7 in the morning. The regional edition of Forbes magazine had officially hit the newsstands, and the digital version had just gone live online. I walked back inside, sat at my kitchen island, and opened my laptop. There it was, front and center on the digital homepage. A high-resolution photo of me, wearing a sharp, tailored navy suit, standing confidently with my arms crossed against the backdrop of my main logistics facility. The headline was massive, printed in bold, undeniable letters. The $15 million empire built by a college dropout. How Matthew overcame his family's doubts to conquer logistics. The article was a masterpiece. Sarah, the editor, had pulled no punches. She detailed my entire journey. She wrote about the grueling night shifts at the warehouse, the self-taught coding sessions at 3 in the morning, and the relentless drive it took to build my company from a single laptop into a nationwide network. But the part that hit the hardest was the personal angle. I hadn't named my parents or my brother directly in the interview, but I didn't have to. I laid out the truth. How my grandmother's inheritance, meant to be my college fund, had been taken from me to fund a sibling's lifestyle. I talked about being constantly belittled, being called a failure, and finally being thrown out into the rain and told to go live in the streets. It was a story of ultimate vindication, and the internet absolutely ate it up. By 8 in the morning, my phone started buzzing. At first, it was just a few texts from business associates and old friends congratulating me. By 9, it was a constant, vibrating hum on my desk. My LinkedIn notifications were exploding. People were sharing the article everywhere. And then, at exactly 9:15, the first call from my mother came through. I watched her name flash on the screen. Eleanor. I didn't answer. I just watched it ring until it went to voicemail. 2 minutes later, she called again. Then a text came through. Matthew, oh my God. We just saw the magazine. Why didn't you tell us? We need to talk immediately. We are so proud of you. Proud. That word made my stomach turn. 3 weeks ago, she was telling her entire church congregation that I was a homeless bum sleeping in my car. She had stolen $14,000 from me and justified it by calling me greedy. And now, suddenly, she was proud. I deleted the text and muted her contact. Over the next 3 hours, she called me 15 times. I ignored every single one. While my mother was desperately trying to claw her way back into my life, my father was experiencing a very different kind of mourning. Down in the financial district, the trap I had set with Mr. Sterling was snapping shut with bone-crushing force. According to the timeline my lawyer, Harrison, had laid out, the bank had officially notified my father's failing real estate developer that they were in default. True to his word, Mr. Sterling swooped in. His massive investment fund purchased the debt from the bank at a steep discount. My father, Arthur, walked into an emergency meeting that morning thinking he was going to beg the local bank manager for an extension. Instead, he found himself sitting across a massive oak conference table from Mr. Sterling, a man known for tearing companies apart for sport. Sterling didn't offer my father an extension. He offered him an ultimatum. He called in the personal guarantee my father had signed. He demanded the entire multimillion-dollar balance immediately. My father, sweating through his suit, admitted he didn't have the liquid capital. He was utterly trapped. If Sterling took him to court, my father would lose his house, his retirement, his cars, everything. He would be forced into total, humiliating bankruptcy. So, Sterling offered him the only lifeline available: predatory buyout. Sterling's fund would absorb the debt and release my father from his personal guarantee. But in exchange, my father had to sign over complete, unconditional ownership of the entire townhouse project. He had to walk away with absolutely nothing. All those years of posturing, all those claims of being a financial genius, wiped out with a single signature. Arthur had no choice. His hands shaking violently, he signed the papers. He surrendered the deed. He walked out of that office a broken, defeated man, unaware that the LLC that now owned his life's work was entirely funded and controlled by the son he had kicked out into the rain. I waited 2 days to let the reality of their situation marinate. I wanted my father to feel the sting of his massive failure. I wanted Elijah to feel the walls closing in as his creditors started circling his fake life. And I wanted my mother to exhaust herself trying to reach the millionaire son she had thrown away. On Wednesday, I had my executive assistant, Elena, send a formal invitation to my parents' house. It was an invitation for a private family dinner at Le Bernardin, one of the most exclusive, insanely expensive Michelin-starred restaurants in the city. The reservation was under my company's name. I knew they wouldn't refuse. They were desperate. My father needed a miracle to recover his lost pride. Elijah needed cash to save his sinking ship, and my mother just wanted access to my bank account. I arrived at the restaurant 20 minutes early. I wore a custom-tailored charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt, and a subtle but incredibly expensive watch. I sat at a private corner table, the soft amber lighting casting long shadows across the heavy linen tablecloth. I ordered a glass of vintage red wine and waited. They walked in right on time. The change in their demeanor was almost comical. My father, usually puffing his chest out and speaking loudly, looked shrunken. His shoulders were slumped, and the skin around his eyes was deeply lined with stress. My mother had clearly spent hours getting ready, wearing her best jewelry and a forced, nervous smile that didn't reach her eyes. And then there was Elijah, the golden child, the senior vice president. He looked like a man walking to his own execution. I noticed he didn't have the keys to his new Porsche Cayenne in his hand. Jacob had told me earlier that day that Elijah couldn't afford to put premium gas in it, so he was leaving it parked in his garage to avoid putting miles on a car he knew was about to be repossessed. He had actually taken an Uber to the restaurant. As they approached the table, my mother practically sprinted forward, throwing her arms open. "Matthew! Oh, my sweet boy! It is so incredibly good to see you." I didn't stand up. I didn't smile. I just leaned back in my chair and raised my hand slightly, stopping her dead in her tracks. "Have a seat, Eleanor." Her smile faltered. She slowly lowered her arms and sat down next to my father. Elijah took the seat across from me. He couldn't look me in the eye. He stared down at the silver cutlery as if it was the most fascinating thing in the world. "Matthew," my father started, his voice lacking its usual booming authority. "We read, right?" I said, taking a slow sip of my wine. "Family." The waiter arrived and poured water for the table. Nobody looked at the menus. The tension was suffocating. They were all waiting for the right moment to pivot the conversation to money. Elijah finally broke the silence. He cleared his throat, trying to muster up his old corporate arrogance, but his voice cracked. "Look, Matt," Elijah said, forcing a smile. "You've done well, really well. I respect the hustle, but running an empire takes a massive toll. You need people you can trust in your inner circle. As a VP of finance, I could come on board as your CFO. We could keep the wealth in the family. We could dominate the market." I stared at him, the absolute audacity of this man. He was drowning in debt. His ex-wife was taking him to court for custody because he was a deadbeat dad. His house was mortgaged twice over, and he had the nerve to ask me for an executive position in a $15 million company. I placed my wine glass down. The soft clink of the crystal echoed in the quiet corner. It was time. You want to be my CFO, Elijah? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Exactly, he nodded eagerly, leaning forward. I have the corporate experience you lack. I have the MBA. I know how to structure high-yield assets. Do you? I asked. I reached into the inside pocket of my suit jacket and pulled out a thick, white envelope. I tossed it onto the center of the table. It landed with a heavy thud. Because according to my financial investigators, the only thing you know how to structure is catastrophic debt. Elijah's face drained of all color. He froze, his eyes locked on the envelope. My mother gasped. Matthew, what is wrong with you? Why are you having your brother investigated? Because, Eleanor, I said, locking eyes with her. When someone steals $14,000 from my bank account, I like to know exactly where my money is going. My father snapped his head toward my mother. What is he talking about? You took money from him? It was family equity. My mother cried out, her voice shrill and panicked. She looked at my father, then at me. Elijah needed it. It was an emergency. An emergency? I repeated coldly. Yes, I suppose putting a cash down payment on a Porsche Cayenne with a subprime, predatory interest rate counts as an emergency for a guy whose credit score is lower than his shoe size. My father looked at Elijah in absolute horror. You bought a Porsche? You told me you needed cash for a tech startup. You told me you were building equity. He lied to you, Arthur? I said, sitting forward, resting my forearms on the table. The authority in my voice commanded the entire space. He lied to you just like he lied to his ex-wife during their divorce settlement. He is broke. He is drowning. The golden child you drained my college fund for is a complete fraud. Elijah opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. He looked like a fish suffocating on a dock. I didn't stop. I turned my attention fully to my father. He was staring at Elijah with a look of pure, unadulterated betrayal. But don't be too hard on him, Arthur, I said quietly. After all, he learned his financial management skills from you. My father's head snapped back to me, his brow furrowed in anger. Watch your mouth, Matthew. I have made smart, conservative investments my entire life. I hit a rough patch with the townhouse development, yes, but I handled it. I surrendered the asset to a private fund to protect our home. I took the hit like a man. I smiled. It was a cold, empty smile. I reached into my jacket one last time and pulled out a sleek, black leather folder. I slid it slowly across the linen tablecloth until it stopped right in front of his plate. Open it, I commanded. My father looked at the folder, then at me. His hands were trembling again. He slowly flipped it open. Inside was the final, notarized deed of transfer for the massive townhouse development. The document he had signed under extreme duress just 48 hours ago in Mr. Sterling's office. He read the top line. His eyes widened. He read the second line, where the purchasing LLC was clearly named. And then he saw my signature at the bottom, right next to his own. He looked up at me, his breath hitching in his throat. You are the buyer. Sterling was working for you. Sterling works for whoever pays him, Arthur, I replied evenly. And I pay very well. This is our property, my father whispered, his voice cracking. He looked like he was going to be sick right there on the table. Correction, I said, my tone slicing through the air like a razor blade. It was your property. Now it is mine. You guaranteed a doomed project to stroke your own ego. You were going to lose everything. I just bought the debt to make sure that when it fell directly into my hands. The silence at the table was deafening. Even the background hum of the restaurant seemed to fade away. My mother was weeping silently into her napkin. Elijah was staring blankly at the wall, his fake reality completely obliterated. And my father sat there, a broken shell of the tyrant he used to be. The difference between you and me, I said, standing up from the table, is that I didn't have to lie, steal, or manipulate to build my life. I played the long game. I worked in the shadows while you all paraded around in the light. You told me to go live in the streets. You threw me out like garbage. I dropped a sleek, black titanium credit card on the table to cover my glass of wine and whatever they decided to eat. "Enjoy the dinner," I said, buttoning my suit jacket. "It's the last thing I will ever pay for in this family. If any of you ever contact me, step foot near my building, or speak my name in public again, I will instruct my lawyers to legally bankrupt what little you have left." I turned my back on them and walked out of the restaurant. I didn't look back. I stepped out into the cool night air, the city lights reflecting off the damp pavement. The heavy weight that I had been carrying on my shoulders for 14 long years was completely gone. I breathed in deeply. I was free. The fallout from that dinner was spectacular, brutal, and incredibly fast. I didn't have to lift a single finger to ruin them publicly. Their own actions did that for them. A few days later, Jacob called me. He was practically breathless. "Matt, it is a complete bloodbath out here," Jacob said, the shock evident in his voice. "The news about the townhouse project leaked. Everyone at the country club knows that Arthur lost his biggest asset to you. They know he was on the brink of bankruptcy." "And Eleanor?" I asked, looking out over the city from my office window. "She tried to go to her church prayer group and spin a new story," Jacob said, letting out a harsh laugh. "She tried to claim that Arthur graciously gave you the property to help you out. But Olivia, the town gossip, she had already heard the truth from a bank teller. Olivia called your mother a thief and a liar right in the middle of the church lobby." Eleanor ran out crying. "They are completely socially exiled." It was exactly what I expected. High society doesn't tolerate failure, but they absolutely despise fake wealth being exposed. My parents had built their entire identity on being superior to everyone else. Now, they were the ultimate cautionary tale. But the most satisfying domino to fall was Elijah. Later that week, I got a video sent to my phone from an anonymous number. It was filmed from across the street of Elijah's townhouse. In broad daylight, a heavy-duty tow truck was backed into his driveway. Two men in high-vis vests were hooking up chains to the gleaming black Porsche Cayenne. Elijah was standing in his driveway in his bathrobe, screaming at the repo men, frantically waving his arms. Neighbors were standing on their lawns, watching the golden child get stripped of his fake armor. He hadn't made a single payment on the car. The lender didn't waste any time. They snatched it right back. Without his luxury car, without his fake startup investment, and with his massive debts becoming public knowledge at his financial firm, his entire career was practically over. Nobody trusts a financial VP who is getting his car repossessed on a Tuesday afternoon. This is the moment that changes everything, the moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You've been amazing. Please give this video a like and comment one below to let me know you've made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey. You would think that after being utterly exposed, they would retreat in shame and leave me alone. But you can never underestimate the entitlement of toxic parents. Exactly 1 week after the dinner, the intercom on my desk buzzed. It was the head of security for my penthouse building, a massive guy named Marcus. "Mr. Matthew, I apologize for the interruption," Marcus said in his deep, rumbling voice. "But there is a woman in the lobby. She is causing quite a scene. She claims to be your mother, Eleanor. She's crying hysterically and demanding we let her up to your residence." I closed my laptop. My heart didn't speed up. I didn't feel a pang of guilt. I just felt tired. Tired of the endless drama. "Put her on the lobby phone, Marcus," I said. A few seconds later, I heard the frantic, sobbing voice of my mother echoing through the speaker. "Matthew, Matthew, please," she wailed. "You have to help us. Your father is a broken man. He won't get out of bed. And Elijah is ruined. They took his car, Matthew. They are foreclosing on his house next week. He has nowhere to go." "That sounds like a terrible situation for a senior vice president to be in," I said coldly. "How can you be so cruel?" she screamed, the tears suddenly turning to anger. You have millions. You have an empire. You could pay off his house right now and you wouldn't even notice the money was gone. He is your brother. Family is supposed to help family. Family equity, right, Eleanor? I replied, throwing her own words back at her. No, the bank is going to take his house. And when they do, he can pack his bags, stand in the driveway, and go live in the streets. Maybe that will wake him up. She gasped. She knew exactly what I was quoting. I didn't steal from you to destroy you, she sobbed, completely pivoting back to playing the victim. I just wanted everyone to be okay. It's your father's fault. He pushed Elijah too hard. He made us do this. Stop, I said firmly. You are not a victim. You chose your favorite son, and you chose to fund his delusions with my money. You made your bed. Now you get to watch it burn. Matthew, please. Marcus, I said, speaking directly to the security guard. This woman is permanently banned from the premises. If she shows up again, call the police and have her arrested for trespassing. Escort her out. I hit the button and cut the line. I sat in the silence of my office. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, officially closing the door on my own mother. But it was also the most necessary. I realized in that moment that blind loyalty to toxic blood isn't a virtue. It's a prison sentence, and I had just signed my own pardon. A year went by, a full, glorious, peaceful 12 months. I threw myself into my work, but with a different mindset. I wasn't running away from my family's shadow anymore. I was building my own light. The townhouse development that I had taken from my father didn't sit empty. I fired the incompetent developers and brought in my own team, but I didn't turn it into hyper-luxury condos for the elite. Instead, I restructured the project to create high-quality, affordable housing for working-class families and young professionals, people who actually worked hard and needed a break. One Saturday afternoon, I drove my G-Wagon through the newly finished neighborhood. The streets were paved, the lawns were green, and children were riding bikes on the sidewalks. I saw a young couple carrying moving boxes into one of the corner units. They looked exhausted but incredibly happy. I pulled over to the curb and rolled down my window. Jacob was walking down the driveway of a beautiful 3-bedroom unit, carrying a toolbox. I had given him first pick of the properties at a heavily subsidized rate. He was finally moving out of his cramped apartment. Hey, landlord, Jacob yelled with a massive grin, walking over to the car. Place looks incredible, Matt. My wife is over the moon. Glad to hear it, Jacob. You earned it. I smiled. Looking at Jacob, looking at the families settling into their real lives, it hit me. This is what true legacy is. It isn't about bragging rights at a country club. It isn't about leasing a Porsche you can't afford to impress people you hate. It's about creating stability. It's about building something real that outlasts your own ego. I had taken a toxic asset built on my father's arrogance and turned it into a foundation for decent people. Part 7.2. The father's secret. Before I drove away, Jacob leaned into the window, his expression turning serious. Listen, Matt, he said softly. When your parents were packing up to move out of the big house last month, my mom went over to help them clear out the attic. She found a box of old papers your dad was going to throw away. She thought you might want to see something inside it. Jacob reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded, slightly yellowed piece of paper. He handed it to me. I'll see you around, Matt, Jacob said, patting the door of my car before walking back to his new house. I parked the car in a quiet cul-de-sac and unfolded the paper. It was a letter written by my father, dated nearly 15 years ago, right around the time I had started my online business in my bedroom. It was addressed to an old business partner of his who had passed away. A draft he had never mailed. I started reading. Elijah is doing well in school, but he's soft. He needs constant praise. He needs me to hold his hand. But Matthew terrifies me, John. The boy is 18, he dropped out, and he is already negotiating freight contracts from a laptop in the basement. He doesn't ask for my advice. He doesn't need my money. He looks at me like he sees right through me. If he succeeds on his own, without my name, it proves that everything I've built my authority on is a lie. I have to keep him down. I have to make sure he needs me, because if he ever realizes how capable he actually is, he will leave us all in the dust. I read the paragraph 3 times. The words seemed to lift off the page and punch me in the chest. All these years, the insults, the belittling, the stolen college fund, the constant elevation of Elijah. I thought it was because I wasn't good enough. I thought I was the broken one. But it was the exact opposite. My father wasn't disappointed in me. He was terrified of me. He was a small, insecure man who needed to feel like a god in his own house. Elijah fed that ego by constantly needing bailouts and advice. But I was independent. My mere existence threatened his fragile illusion of control. He tried to crush me not because I was a failure, but because he knew I was a massive success waiting to happen. I carefully folded the letter and put it in the center console. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I felt an overwhelming, profound sense of peace. The last lingering shadow of doubt in my mind evaporated. The ghost of my father's approval was finally dead. As for where they ended up, the reality was bleak. Without my financial backing and with his reputation in ruins, Arthur couldn't secure another loan in the city. He and my mother were forced to sell their beautiful suburban home at a massive loss just to cover the remaining debts that Sterling hadn't absorbed. They moved 2 states away to a cheap, cramped rental apartment in a town where nobody knew their names. And Elijah, the former senior vice president, after his townhouse was foreclosed on and his ex-wife won full custody and maximum child support due to his financial fraud, he was forced to file for bankruptcy. Last I heard through the grapevine, he was working a miserable 100% commission sales job, desperately trying to cold call people to sell cheap insurance policies. They were strangers to me now, just people who happened to share my blood. I felt no urge to check on them, no urge to rub my success in their faces. Total, absolute indifference is the ultimate form of revenge. I'm 33 now. I stood on the balcony of my penthouse last night. It was raining, a heavy, relentless downpour that reminded me of that Thursday night over a year ago. The night I was kicked out into the cold and told I was nothing. I looked down at the city. I saw the glowing lights of the logistics trucks moving my products across the state. I saw the distant outline of the neighborhood I had built from the ashes of my father's arrogance. I felt the solid, unshakable ground beneath my feet. If there is one thing I want you to take away from my life, it is this: never let miserable people dictate your worth. Blood does not give anyone the right to abuse you, steal from you, or tell you that your dreams are invalid. Sometimes, the most toxic element in your life is the one sitting across from you at the Thanksgiving table. You have to be willing to walk away. You have to be willing to be the villain in their story so you can be the hero in your own. They told me I was a useless failure. They told me to go live in the streets. I did exactly what they asked. I went to the streets. And then I bought the whole damn block. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I know it was a heavy one, but it's the honest truth. I hope this resonated with you in some way. Family dynamics can be incredibly complicated, and sometimes making the right choice is the hardest thing you'll ever have to do. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? Have you ever had to walk away from people you loved to protect your own peace? Let me know down in the comments. I read every single one. Before you go, I have a special request. If you are hearing my voice right now, it means you stayed until the very end. You didn't just scroll past. You are part of the rare few who appreciate real, deep storytelling. I call this the 1% Club. If you are in the club, please drop a W in the comments. W stands for winner. It's our secret code, so I know exactly who my true supporters are. If you enjoyed this, please hit that like button and make sure to follow the channel. I have so many more stories to share with you all. Take care of yourselves, know your worth, and I'll see you in the next one.